be able to share with you from my heart this morning the things that God placed there about Thanksgiving. After the message, I'm going to give you an opportunity to share as well. So if you'd like to be thinking of just one or two sentences that you could express in thanksgiving to God, we'll have a time for that at the end of the message. Next Thursday, most of us in America will gather with family and friends, sit around tables loaded with turkey and all the trimmings, and revel in the good times we share. Yet as we know, Thanksgiving is about more than stuffing our faces in nonstop football. It's even about more than those iconic pilgrims who, after much hardship, felt compelled to thank God for his provision and bounty. Today, besides the United States, there are 7 nations: Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Liberia, and Switzerland, that have official legal holidays for Thanksgiving. But just because a country doesn't have a formal and specific date for Thanksgiving doesn't mean that its people do not observe some form of celebration. In Asia, there are feasts that celebrate the rice harvest. In Africa, one traditional prayer expresses the idea that never can we thank you for your good deeds and all your blessings. South American Native American peoples have incorporated their traditional customs into celebrations of Thanksgiving. In European countries, there have long been times of Thanksgiving for the harvest. There seems to be a universal awareness that our blessings come from somewhere, and that some kind of thanks are in order. America's first Thanksgiving celebration wasn't even the one celebrated by the Pilgrims at Plymouth. Long before that, the original inhabitants of this continent had feasts and festivals in gratitude for the gifts they'd received. The first Thanksgiving by European colonists took place in Jamestown in 1619. That celebration at Plymouth, the one we most often think of at this time of the year, was a feast of gratitude after the Pilgrims, who had survived a harsh winter with tremendous loss of life, looked forward to a bountiful harvest. For the next century and a half, Thanksgiving was celebrated somewhat randomly in the various colonies and states. In 1789, President George Washington called for the first National Day of Thanksgiving, saying, "It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and humbly to implore his protection and favor." It wasn't until Abraham Lincoln declared a National Day of Thanksgiving in 1863 that the day became a permanent feature of the American cultural landscape. Yet, as believers and followers of Jesus Christ, our tradition of giving thanks to God goes back much, much further than the Pilgrims in Plymouth Rock. The ancient Jews celebrated 2 festivals, or feasts of Thanksgiving. In the Feast of First Fruits, which was held early in the year, the first harvested sheaf of grain was waved before the altar in recognition that the harvest was a gift from God. Later in the year, the Feast of Booths reminded the people that God had preserved them and protected them and provided for their ancestors during the Exodus. When God established that feast, he also commanded that the people were to leave the borders of the field unharvested so that the poor might have a place to glean, to gather food. And I think that perhaps our modern tradition of canned food drives at this time of the year probably has its spiritual roots in that practice, in that recognition that those of us who have are obliged to share with those who do not. As natural as it may seem to give thanks for the many blessings we receive, it seems to be a human tendency to forget. In the book of Deuteronomy, we read that at the end of his life, Moses warned the people not to forget how God had blessed them on their long journey. He understood that they were in danger of taking God's blessings for granted. Later, in the 107th Psalm, David recounts the many times that God had delivered his people from trials and oppression, the many times God had blessed their land with fruitfulness. And he concludes, "Whoever is wise, let him heed these things and consider the great love of the Lord."